Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, the key to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast. With us, you don't need any caffeine to stay awake during your PMP exam preparation. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. In this lesson, we are going to take a look at all the knowledge, skills and tasks that PMI has defined as being part of the PMP exam for Domain 2, planning the project. And if you take a look at our learning goals here, explain the focus, describe the tasks, name the specific knowledge and skills, understand how ethics is part of this, you're probably going to say, but wait a minute, those are the same goals that we saw in Domain 1. Well, not surprising at all. Our overall goal with these lessons here on the PMP exam content is to teach you what the PMP exam is going to test you on. So the goals for Domain 2 are the same as for Domain 1. And looking a bit into the future, guess what the goals are going to be for Domain 3, 4 and 5? And it's the same thing when it comes to the lesson focus. We have separate lessons for the PM processes at the top, just as we have a separate lesson for the general skills at the very bottom. And right now, in the next few minutes, we are going to focus on the content tasks, ethics, and domain skills for the second domain of planning. So let's begin with the domain overview. And in regards to the numbers in this domain, we have 24%, that's 48 questions on the PMP exam that will be all about planning. In the official PMP content outline, PMI has defined 12 tasks. We'll look at each of these individually later on, and 13 domain-specific skills. The focus of this domain is quite clear. I mean, it's the planning domain, right? We have to assess the detailed requirements. We have to drill down now that we're done with initiation. We want to establish the deliverables. What exactly is it that we are going to give to the customer in the end? We will begin creating the WBS because the WBS is such a central document when it comes to the execution of our project that we need to plan it properly. And when it comes to planning, well, we are going to have to plan everything. In fact, most of the 12 tasks that are in this domain are all about creating a plan. We'll see that in just a moment. We have 13 domain-specific knowledge and skills. Couldn't fit them all onto one slide, so here is part 1, and you will recognize these because we review each of these in other videos here on the Project Management Prepcast in the other lessons. Requirements gathering technique, work breakdown structure, tools and techniques, time, budget and cost estimation, scope management, resource planning, workflow diagramming, types and uses of organizational charts. You should already be aware of these and how they work and how they are being applied in a project from all our other lessons. And here is part 2 of these 13, and the interesting fact about these 6 skills that are left is that they all begin with elements, purpose and techniques of, and then they end with a specific focus. So the first one is element, purpose and techniques of project planning. You need to know the overall process of how to plan a project. Communications planning. Here you need to know how we go about setting up our communications plan. Procurement planning. You need to go through the process of planning for your procurements, beginning with, are we going to make or buy this thing? Quality management planning. This requires you to understand how to take your company's quality policy and turn that into QA and QC planning for your project. Change management planning. Here you need to know how a change management system and its processes work and how you will plan for it on your project. And lastly, risk management planning. requires you to understand the processes in risk and then set up a tailored plan for how you will handle the risks on this specific project. Again, we review how to do this in detail in the many separate lessons on these topics. This brief overview here is just meant as a refresher and a reminder that this is what you need to know because you'll be tested on it. And now, let's move on to the individual tasks. As before, we're going to review the task text. Then we'll give you our interpretation of what this means, and we'll review ethics at the end. In the planning domain, task 1 is defined as follows. Assess detailed project requirements, constraints and assumptions with stakeholders based on the project charter, lessons learned from previous projects, and the use of requirements gathering techniques, e.g. planning sessions, brainstorming, focus groups, in order to establish the project deliverables. Alright, what does that mean? As part of this task, you are required to take the project charter, which is a relatively high-level document, and through progressive elaboration, add more and more detail to the customer requirements. By the end of the planning session, all requirements have to be identified and documented. But just as importantly, you have to do the same with your constraints and assumptions. If you don't identify these, you will hear the following words from your customer again and again. But I thought that this was going to be different. And last but not least, a project is undertaken to produce something. On a high level, we call this something our deliverables. Just as you need to completely identify all requirements, you also have to completely describe all your deliverables. And because you have constraints and assumptions, that will also allow you to say which deliverables are included and which are excluded. The focus in this task is clearly on elaborating requirements into deliverables without ignoring the lessons that we have learned from past similar projects. And now let's take a look at how ethics influences this task. And why do we do this again? Because even though the Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct is a separate document from the PMBOK guide, ethics itself cannot be separated from our work. Every action we take, every decision we make, every task we complete should be guided by good moral principles. So, here are some ideas how ethics can guide us for task 1. The first core value that we have is responsibility. A mandatory standard from the Code of Ethics is that we will uphold policies, rules, regulations, and laws. This means that during the planning process, we have to ensure that our plans follow these rules. So, no cutting corners or working your way around regulations, just because it helps your budgeting or shortens your timeline. Similarly, our plan should be created in such a way that we take the best interest of society, public safety, and environment into account. The planning stage is the first time when conflicting interests will become apparent. This is where respect plays in. Some people want it this way and some want it that way. Conflict arises. It is your job as a project manager to ensure that these conflicts are respectfully dealt with by listening to everyone and finding a solution that is acceptable to everyone involved. Of course, acceptable to everyone involved is not possible 100% of the time, but we strive for it. Moving on to fairness. As we are performing the project planning, we have to ensure that we listen to all the stakeholders that are involved and touched by the project. Nothing less is acceptable. And lastly, honesty. This one should be obvious. As you are creating the project plan, you have to create a plan that doesn't try to deceive people. If you know from past lessons learned that task X should usually take 30 days, then that is what should be planned for. Even if stakeholders are more likely to approve your plan if you shorten the overall project duration by, say, 20% and towards the end say, "Whoops, our plan was wrong." We will come back to ethics again and again in the various tasks and in the various domains. For this task here, we have specifically gone through each of the 4 core values from the Code of Ethics as a start to get us going here in this domain. But in the future, we will not review all 4 on every task, but as you have seen from domain 1, we will focus on just a select number of the values. Here is the official text for task 2 in the planning domain. Create the work breakdown structure with the team by deconstructing the scope in order to manage the scope of the project. When I first started studying the PMBOK guide, I had never heard of a WBS before. In my previous projects, we had gone from the charter straight to describing the scope. However, if you look at how the PMBOK guide does it, you'll see that the WBS is the basis for so many activities: cost, schedule, quality, to name just the 3 of them. So we need to create a WBS early on and use it as the basis of our project. Take a look at the word deconstructing from this task. Does something strike you as odd about that word? Well, the PMBOK guide uses the word decomposition and not deconstruction. To me, that's not a problem. It's the spirit that counts and not the word itself. What do we learn from this? Be prepared that some PMP exam questions may use words that are similar but not 100% the same as the ones that you have studied, and that's really okay. I've mentioned it just a moment ago. The WBS is the basis for the project and used for various activities. This task here clearly spelled out that it is a major player in scope management. Makes sense, since the WBS is deliverable oriented and the scope is the basis for our deliverables. You might now think for yourself that in regards to ethics, this is a tough one. How could ethics play into creating a WBS? Well, let's do what's really fun and let's put on our devil's hat and do everything the wrong way. Let's see. Responsibility. Frankly, I don't like creating a WBS. I think a WBS is a waste of time, so I will only do it half-heartedly and just create something that looks like a WBS. Respect. I just joined this new company here and the project that I was given is pretty close to my last one. Well, I'll just copy-paste the WBS from my previous employer and I'm not going to tell anyone. Fairness. Based on what I know of this project, I can see that my brother-in-law is probably going to be selling some of his parts, the parts that his company produces, to this project. Nobody needs to know that. We'll just do that. And honesty. Like I said in the beginning, I really hate creating WBSs. So once I created it, who cares if it contains errors? I don't even care that I know that some of the info in the WBS is clearly wrong. And you can guess, while this is one way of creating a WBS, it's not a very good one. Think back to the slide earlier on which I gave you the overview of this domain. I said that the domain has 12 tasks. So far we have seen 2 of them. We can now continue in the same way for the rest of this presentation as we did for the first 2 tasks. Show you the description, give you an interpretation, look at the ethics. I can tell you it will get pretty boring because 7 out of the 10 remaining tasks are all about creating a plan. What's going to happen is these 7 are all going to culminate into task 11, which is present the project plan to the key stakeholders for approval. And these 7 tasks that all lead into this number 11 here are task number 3, develop a budget plan. Task 5, develop a human resources plan. Task 6, communications plan. Task 7, procurement plan. Task 8, quality management plan. Task 9, change management plan. And task 10, develop a risk management plan. having these 7 tasks that all culminate into the creation of the project management plan makes a lot of sense, because if you look at the PMBOK guide, you will find that it defines that all of the items that you see here on this slide are part of the overall project management plan. Now, let's compare these items here to the 7 tasks that we have just seen and highlight the 7 plans from the 7 tasks in red. And as you can see, these 7 plans are all part of what the PMBOK guide says goes into a project management plan. But you may ask, what about the ones that are not in red? Shouldn't there be a task that says create requirements management plan in the PMP exam content outline? Don't worry, you still need to know these things, but the PMP content outline just doesn't specifically mention them. There isn't a one-to-one overlap between 400 pages of the PMBOK guide and 14, 15 or so pages of the exam content outline. And by the way, do you remember what we call all of these plans that you see here and how they relate to the overall project management plan? We call them the subsidiary plans because they are all considered to be part of the overall project management plan. And now let's go through these tasks that all talk about creating a plan. I'll give you a quick interpretation, and in the end we'll do a review of how ethics influences them. We obviously begin with task number 3. Develop a budget plan based on the project scope using estimating techniques in order to manage project cost. The focus here is cost management, which is closely tied to the actual scope that you create on the project. That makes sense because, as we know, if you increase the scope, that usually means higher cost. We now go from task 3 straight to task 5, but don't worry, we'll come back to task number 4 later on because it doesn't talk about a plan, but it talks about the schedule. So, number 5 is develop a human resource management plan by defining the roles and responsibilities of the project team members in order to create an effective project organization structure and provide guidance regarding how resources will be utilized and managed. While the activity of creating our human resources management plan is to define the who does what, the goal of the plan is to ensure that our project is organized in such a way that we can work effectively. Next, we have task 6. Develop a communication plan based on the project organization structure and external stakeholder requirements in order to manage the flow of project information. You've heard this one before on the Prepcast. We create a communications management plan so that we know exactly what type of information is sent to which of our stakeholders in what format. For instance, detailed financial reports go to the CFO, while the CIO receives a high-level progress report. Moving on to task 7. Develop a procurement plan based on the project scope and schedule in order to ensure that the required project resources will be available. If you analyze this task, you might wonder, but what about situations when we hire an outside company to produce deliverables for us? That's more than just ordering resources. Did they forget that? Not really. This task is more encompassing because we would procure the outside resources to build these deliverables for us. You have to simply read between the lines here. Also, while the task defines the overall content of the PMP exam, they cannot include all the details from our project management methodologies, and you have to combine a bit. So basically, task 7 here is all about buying stuff for the project. And because you cannot say stuff in a document on which you base a certification exam, they had to select an appropriate word. Resources does the trick nicely. That much said, take a look at how nicely crafted task 8 is in comparison. Develop a quality management plan based on the project scope and requirements in order to prevent the occurrence of defects and reduce the cost of quality. I believe this sums up the whole quality section of the PMBOK guide nicely. Task 9 here is develop a change management plan by defining how changes will be handled in order to track and manage changes. And just as an aside here, don't forget that your change management plan should not only include changes that you receive for the results of your project, for instance, a change to the scope, a change in the due date, or a change in the quality requirements, but the change management plan also addresses changes in our project management approach as well. For instance, when we notice that the selected quality management approaches aren't working, how will we go about making updates and changes to our quality management plan? Moving on to task 10. Develop a risk management plan by identifying, analyzing and prioritizing project risks and defining risk response strategies in order to manage uncertainty throughout the project lifecycle. Look in particular at the last 3 lines here of this task. In order to manage uncertainty throughout the project lifecycle. This emphasizes the fact that your risk management activities have to start very early on in the project and that they go on until the end. And by the way, this is the only one of the 37 tasks that are defined in the PMP exam content outline where the words project lifecycle are used. Now, remember the overview page where we looked at all the planning tasks? Remember what was at the center of that slide there? All the 7 previous planning tasks culminate in what? They all culminate here in the task 11 of the planning domain, the project management plan. Present the project plan to the key stakeholders, if required, in order to obtain approval to execute the project. The focus here is clearly to create a central project planning document based on which your project will be executed once you have received the go-ahead from your sponsor. So, we have 8 processes that talk about creating various plans. How about the overall ethics here? Let's take a look at our 4 core values. Responsibility. Because we have been handed a project and because we follow project management best practices, this means that we go through this planning process. We follow through on our commitment as project managers, and doing the planning is one commitment that we make. Respect. Planning means to define how we will be handling the various resources throughout the project. How will we treat people? How will we handle the budget? How is safety addressed? How are we ensuring that we take care of nature and the environment? All of these concerns for resources have to be taken into consideration as we plan. Fairness. As we plan, we may have our own prejudices. We like to do things a certain way. However, we have to be able to jump over our own shadows and select approaches and processes that are best for the project. We have to be impartial and objective and plan without favoritism. And lastly, honesty. In the honesty section, the Code of Ethics tells us that we have to seek the truth. That's a bit difficult here because we are planning. We are developing an approach for future events. We don't really know what is truly going to happen. So doing the best we can as we plan the project is required of us. Don't just guess what will happen. Base your assumptions and your plans on lessons learned from the past and include as many subject matter experts as possible in the process. That will take you closer to the truth than if you just pick numbers out of the air. And with that, we have come to the end of reviewing the tasks that address the creation of the various plans. In this domain, we have 12 tasks that we need to review. 1 to 12 are here on this slide, and as you can guess by the colors, which we have given task number 4 and task number 12, This means that these are the two tasks that we have not yet looked at. So let's go to number 4. Develop a project schedule based on the project timeline, scope and resource plan in order to manage timely completion of the project. In this task here, we are creating the schedule baseline. Think back to the slide on which I showed you all the various plans and the parts that go into the project management plan. You will find the schedule baseline is also part of the project management plan, and here this is where we create it. And if you allow me to create a new term, since we're talking about planning constantly here, it's kind of your time plan, the time plan that shows you in what steps and durations we are going to complete the project. And because time is finite in the schedule, well, just like the budget is final, it is going to receive a lot of attention from your stakeholders. And if you are an experienced project manager, you already know about that. In regards to ethics, let's look at respect and honesty. As part of the schedule, you are very likely also going to create a resource-loaded schedule. This means that we are going to be assigning people to our schedule. And please remember that. These resources are people, human beings. They are not anonymous. You will meet and greet them. Respect their needs for weekend playtime. Respect the fact that they don't want to work 60 hours a week, week after week after week. Keep their needs in mind as you are scheduling. Honesty means truth. The schedule that you are building is supposed to be the best approximation of the truth for how long your project will take. Your stakeholders will challenge you on this. They will tell you that they need the project completed in 50% of the time that you have scheduled. They will then order you to be a team player and make it happen. Remember that it's easy to change the dates in the schedule itself. It's just a piece of paper after all. But if you go and you cut your schedule by 50%, like you have just been told, your schedule just becomes a lie. We are moving on to the final task here in Domain 2, planning the project. Task 12. Conduct a kick-off meeting with all key stakeholders in order to announce the start of the project, communicate the project milestones, and share other relevant information. Obviously, once you have finished the planning process and obtained approval to move forward, you are going to want to call the stakeholders together for a kick-off meeting, which signals the start of the project. But more than that, this is usually the first time when you as the project manager have the complete team assembled. This is then the moment when you have to go from project planner to project leader. Give us the vision. Get us excited. Show us where this project will take us. And lastly, this is also the first opportunity for team building. Don't just blurt out the information about the project. Give us some time to get to know the rest of the team as well. We are now at the end of the planning process, and you have brought your team together for a kickoff. Obviously, respect and fairness is what should be our focus, but let's not forget to be honest as well. In respect, here it is obvious that everyone on the team should be invited to the kickoff. Yes, there can be a meeting for senior management that is separate from the general team kickoff, but everyone, all the stakeholders should have an opportunity to attend a kick-off meeting at their level of participation. Fairness. We haven't talked about this previously, but this is the moment when you prove to have made all opportunities available to everyone. During a kick-off, you should never have to answer the question, why is Joe assigned to the best tasks on your project? I'm much more qualified than he is. Honesty. On a larger project, kick-off meetings are often big events with massive presentations to the team, and that makes it way too easy to put on your rose-colored glasses and make things appear less risky and less difficult than they truly are. Don't throw your ethics out the window just because you need to have this meeting go off without a problem. If you think that there might be problems because of what you present, then address these issues openly and honestly. And that's it. We have reviewed all 12 tasks here in Domain 2, Planning the Project. Here they are again. We begin by assessing requirements and then creating the WBS. From here, we move on to developing all these various plans, and then we create the schedule, the time plan, if you wish. We get the project management plan approved and we kick off our project. Until next time.